Welcome to the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone. Our telephone lines are open at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
And good morning. Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman with you on the Talkback Radio Network. We'll be speaking later on in the hour with Jason Schenker, who is the president of Prestige Economics, a Texas-based market research firm, and he's a consultant, an economic consultant, and he has been quoted by, you name it, MSNBC, CNN. He does a tremendous amount of economic forecasting for lots of different major companies and world entities around the globe. We'll be speaking to him about the economy. But first, I'm on the road. Dr. Gelman's in the studio, and we're going to kind of see what's going on and what's on Dr. Gelman's mind this morning. Good morning, Dr. Gelman.
Good morning.
So, what are we going to talk about this morning, and what is it that you have been thinking about this week?
Well, it's what we usually think about, thoughts.
Well, we've been we're having Mr. Schenker on later on in the hour. I was talking to you about the economy and about which way it could go, and I am of the opinion that we should be going as far as we can in any direction to find energy in this country. Some people disagree with that too, but where I am right now, gas prices are almost $4 a gallon and are going up. So, what should we do about it?
I don't know. I guess we can discuss that later.
Okay.
On this program, it's an educational program. We look at the way things are versus what we're told. We live in a fascist dictatorship. There can be no question about that. All you need to do is look up the word fascist and look up the word dictator, and that's the country that we have now. On this program, what we do is give examples to prove that, and then we go to historical content to show how it is we got to where we are today. Because it didn't happen overnight. It was an evolutionary process, not really a revolutionary process. Now, we talk about various different topics, and even on the same hour program, and it may appear that we are bouncing like a pinball from one topic to another, which is not really related. But underneath it all, they are simply examples of our underlying theory that basically the problems that we face in this nation and in the world, they all come to the same source, and that is the government. We must remember that only government can wage war, only government can commit mass murder, and only government can commit genocide. Therefore, we should be very wary of government, because no other entity can cause the destruction that government causes. And so we're going to go look at a couple of things, couple of myths that the government promulgates through the media, which is nothing but the propaganda arm of the government. It's not a free press. They are a bought and paid for press. And our system of public education, which exists only to indoctrinate and not to educate, and to create a population of illiterates, if not in reading, which is a significant amount, but certainly historical, so that we don't understand what the government has actually done and how far we have deviated from the path that our founding fathers had placed us. Now, for example, let's look at health care. It's a big topic today. The Supreme Court is going to make a decision. We've already discussed the Supreme Court and the other parts of government which are acting outside of what the founding fathers intended them to do. So let's take a look at Medicare and Medicaid. Let's take a look at health care. Let's take a look at the economics of health care. And we begin with the commonly held perception that there's simply not enough money to provide all the health care that people want. Balderdash. That's complete nonsense. That is a canard. There is more than enough money in the healthcare system being spent today, more than enough to give every single American Class A service. The United States spends more on health care than most countries have as far as the gross national product. In fact, there's only 2 or 3 countries in the world whose gross national product exceeds the dollar amount we spend on health care. Not enough money, more than enough money. But what is the problem? We go to the government. That is the problem. There are those who believe that the programs Medicare and Medicaid exist to help gain access to health care for the poor and the elderly. That is not true. Medicare and Medicaid exist for one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to take the decision-making power about health care away from the people and away from physicians and hand it over to government. What does government do with that? 2 things. One, it increases their power. All governments want to enslave their populations. By controlling health care delivery in a nation, the government gains tremendous control over the people. They seek power. Secondly, they seek to divert funds away from necessary providers and give it to the unnecessary providers of health care who are in it for the profit. And who are those individuals? Friends, relatives, cronies, and contributors to politicians and bureaucrats. How do we know this? Medicare and Medicaid cost more per individual than even the most expensive private health insurance. For example, the average cost for every Medicaid eligible individual in the United States hovers around $8,000. The average cost for every Medicare eligible individual is $12,000, not counting the co-pays and the deductibles that they have to submit. This is far more expensive than any private insurer. Those of you who are insured will realize that you're not paying anywhere near that amount of money for your health care insurance. On the other hand, Medicare and Medicaid reimburse physicians half or less what private insurance reimburses. So the question arises, where does that money go? Where does the money go? Well, the money does not go to the Medicare and Medicaid recipient. Obviously, there are very few Medicare and no Medicaid recipients who are wealthy. However, the $1 trillion in Medicare and Medicaid payments do go to the wealthy, the pharmaceutical companies, the durable medical equipment companies, nursing homes, long-term acute care facilities, and all the other avenues of expenditure which are unnecessary but are which highly profitable. Now let's take a look at Medicaid. The most common problems that people have that require visits to clinics, that require medical aid, are diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, elevated cholesterol and lipids, arthritis, things of that nature. To what classification of medications does Medicaid apply the greatest amount of expenditure? Nothing to do with any of those problems. It has to, the number one expenditure for Medicaid for pharmaceuticals in the United States is antipsychotic medications, primarily for children. In the top 10 groups of medications that Medicaid pays for, 4 of those 10 are for psychiatric medications. It is not that there are more prescriptions written for psychiatric medications than for diabetic medications, for antibiotics or things of that, such as that. No, it is that the cost of psychiatric medications are far greater than for any other group of medications, for psychiatric medications, and the biggest source of profit, and just look at the commercials, the biggest source of profit for pharmaceutical companies is psychiatric medications. And so whereas we would not make the decision to spend that money, the government takes the decision away from us and hands it over to the government, and the government determines that the money is going to go to the big corporations such as pharmaceutical corporations. What else? There's many, many other examples. We can talk about the fact that we go into if a parent goes into a physician's office and a parent's on Medicaid and says that their child is a bedwetter, Medicaid will pay for 300 diapers a month. If you wonder why Kimberly Clark and Pampers are making so much money these days, that's one reason. If you think about that, what child needs 10 diapers a month? What happens with those diapers? They get sold into flea markets, but it's a huge amount of money that gets paid for 300 diapers a month, and that, of course, is obviously unnecessary. So it's not a question of mismanagement. It's not a question of incompetence. It is not a question of negligence. It is a question of influence. In Medicare, 35% of Medicare dollars is spent in the last year of life in order to funnel monies to long-term acute care facilities, nursing homes, and others like that. In Medicaid, 70% of those eligible for Medicaid are children. 70% of the money goes for disability payments. If you wonder why so many children are classified as attention deficit disorder, you may not be aware that every child that is classified as disabled, whether through attention deficit disorder or some other issue, that the parent gets $800 a month from the government in SSI payments, $800 a month. So the incentive is to classify your child as psychiatrically disabled. That gives every Medicaid mother $800 a month, which can be spent any way she chooses, because Medicaid payments pick up for the other expenditures, food stamps pick up for other expenditures. So the $800 is a cash payment to the mother, and so mothers go shopping around to principals, to school nurses, to pediatricians, to other doctors, trying to get their child classified as disabled. So now we have millions of children taking psychiatric medications to benefit the negligent mother and to benefit gigantic corporations, which garner billions upon billions of dollars in government expenditures for these medications. And the list goes on and on and on. And so it is nonsense to think there's not enough money. There's more than enough money in the healthcare system. It's just that the government funnels that money to its friends, relatives, cronies, and contributors. There's more than enough money. It is not a question of mismanagement, negligence, or ignorance. It is a question of influence. It is done purposefully. It is not accidental. It is done with the intention of the government to take away the power and the money from the American people and give it to the friends of those in government.
Why is it that we have not heard, or we don't hear it on the news about the amount on these drugs? I mean, the only place I have ever heard that is from you and from our show. Why is this not being reported? I mean, I can't imagine.
As we said earlier, the government is a fascist dictatorship. They control the media. They control the system of public education. Therefore, all the news disseminated, all the information disseminated comes from the most corrupt of organizations, which is the government, and through the propaganda arms of the public system of education and through the mass media. So obviously, you're not going to hear anything that approaches this, because first of all, you have to be interested in looking at this. You have to know where to look. You have to know something about what you're talking about. And that is, Megan Fox can't do it. Tom Brokaw can't do it. Rush Limbaugh can't do it. Mark Levin can't do it. Our senators can't do it. Our congressmen can't do it. You ought to see the way they look at me when I bring this stuff up and when I show them the information, which is government information. This information comes from the government itself. And they don't even know anything about it. And it's because they don't care to know anything about it, because all they care about is money and power, and they don't care what happens to the American population. They promote ignorance, they promote illiteracy, and so we are. It's bread and circus. You know, the old Roman adage: give the people bread and circus, and then the government can do whatever it wants. And you're only going to hear it from individuals like myself. I'm not the only one. There are a few others, but I have the capability of going to the airwaves and pronouncing on this stuff. Most people can't. And so that is why you're not going to hear it, because if Megan Fox said this, she'd be off the air tomorrow. If Tom Brokaw said this, he'd be off the air tomorrow, or he already is off the air. But they'd all be off the air. They're all a bunch of bubbleheads. They're all a bunch of useful dupes and fellow travelers. Let's move on to another topic. Let's talk about conspiracies. Let's look at the World Trade Center and the grand conspiracy of the World Trade Center. And you know what? There was a conspiracy, and no two ways about it. But I tend to think most of the conspiracy theorists are actually paid for by the government because they divert our attention from the true conspiracy. What is and say, well, weren't we just talking about health care? Right. No, what we were not talking about, we were talking about what government does in order to fool the American people and enslave the American people, and that topic is unchanged. We're moving towards conspiracy, government conspiracy. What is the conspiracy? The government creates an environment which directs the emotions of the American people towards what the government wants. So, in World War I, the great fascist Woodrow Wilson wanted the United States involved in World War I, and so he put munitions on merchant marine ships, made sure the German submarines knew about it, and then even though the Germans warned Woodrow Wilson and the United States that this was an act of war because the munitions were going to the enemies of Germany, Woodrow Wilson specifically did it with the help of, guess who, Franklin Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, to lure German submarines into attacking American merchant marine ships. Why? To generate the emotion in the American population to want to go to war against Germany. That's the end of this segment. We'll be back with more conspiracy talk. Well, I guess we're going to go to our guest, and then we'll get back to conspiracy. This is the Talkback Network. We'll be back after this short break.
You are listening to the Talkback Radio Network. We hope you're being enriched by our program today. You may be listening via our archives or to our live broadcast. Dr. Gelman and Rabbi Rosenberg broadcast live on Thursdays from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern, 10 to 11 a.m. Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. You may call the show live during those times, toll free at 888-930-1787, 888-930-1787, or you can find us in the archives 24/7 at ironmicrophone.com.
The odds of this fastballing philanthropist winning the World Series 3 times? 1 in 3 million. The odds of this man having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. Hi, I'm Kurt Schilling. Learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission.
Dr. Lawrence Gelman is a South Texas-based physician and hospital administrator. His mission is to empower Americans with knowledge that will help change the direction of our country. Dr. Gelman has produced a series of DVDs with the facts on myriad political, social, and economic issues. At this time, he is so passionate about our country and the state of our government that he's declared a moratorium on any costs associated with his DVDs. He'll even pay the postage. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the store link. Choose from many outstanding DVDs, including The Hoax, Global Warming, A Convenient Lie, Holocaust, Pro-Choice, The Myth of Roe vs. Wade, and more. Visit ironmicrophone.com. Arm yourself with information that will change minds as well as the future of our country. Order the DVDs now while they're free. Do it quickly because this offer is subject to change in 90 days. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the Store tab to order your free DVD today.
Welcome back to the home of the Iron Microphone. We're taking your calls at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
Back with the program, Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman and you. We are going to have Jason Schenker on the line in just a second. I think we're running a little bit of a technical glitch there. So while we're waiting for Jason to get on, I would like to pick it up again, Dr. Gelman. You were talking about conspiracies and about going back to World War I and probably farther back than that. Why is it the American people, and I know you have very strong feelings about the fact that the government takes control of things and the people seem to be powerless about it. What can the average person do about it? If we live in this kind of society where government is taking way too much power away from the people, at the person level, what can a person do to take back that power? Or is it possible, or is it just too late?
Nothing short. Well, let's move on to the conspiracy deal. So we have Woodrow Wilson wanted to get the United States into war, and the way to do that was to create an environment which lured the German submarines into attacking American merchant marine ships, which are civilian ships, but they were carrying munitions to England and the Allies. So why did Woodrow Wilson want to do that? All presidents, all kings, all dictators, all aristocrats love war. Why do they love war? Because it gives them more power. It gives them the power of life and death. It gets an aphrodisiac for them. And Barack Obama and Woodrow Wilson are no different than Stalin or Hitler when it comes to that regard. And so, of course, we did go to, the United States did go to war, even though the vast majority of Americans were opposed to that. Hundreds of thousands of Americans were incarcerated by Woodrow Wilson. Hundreds of newspapers were closed down under emergency war acts. They even took over the steel industry under emergency war acts. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt once again repeated what he had done. He embargoed steel and oil into Japan, which cannot survive without steel and oil. He involved themselves in the internal and external affairs of Japan, which had nothing to do with the United States, and he parked the American naval fleet in Pearl Harbor, which is in the sphere of influence of Japan. So it was the United States that initiated the warlike acts against Japan, and Japan had not read their history, had not read the history of Franklin Roosevelt, in which they would have learned that this is exactly the way he did things. He created an environment in order to raise the emotional level of a American population that did not want to go to war. And so in order to overcome that obstacle where the American people did not want to go to war, did not want to get involved in Europe or in Asia, and which was what our founding fathers did not want to do either, was go to war. And we wanted to stay out of the affairs of Europe and other areas. But the politicians are the same, whether you call them a president or a king, a senator or a count or a duke. And so the Japanese made the mistake of attacking Pearl Harbor, and we promoted the idea through our media and system of public education purposefully to make it appear that the Japanese were evil, an evil group of people, and Americans were just a bunch of innocent bystanders just trying to do good. And then quite the opposite. The Americans are a bunch of belligerent, aggressive, homicidal maniacs, at least when it comes to the government. They wanted to go to war because that's what presidents do, and that's what happened. Now let's take a look at the World Trade Center. In the World Trade Center, yes, what did the United States do? The United States created an environment which basically invited Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group to attack the United States. It really wouldn't have mattered if it was the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, if it had been the Sears Tower or the Golden Gate Bridge. The United States created an environment by immersing itself into the Middle East where we have no business in being, going against Saddam Hussein for what he did was no worse than what most dictators do today, which are allies of the United States. Certainly not as bad as what China or Russia did or what Cuba did, and we have never gone to war against them. But we went to war against Saddam Hussein, and it was a question of power. Saddam Hussein wanted Kuwait. We said, go ahead and take it. And he made the mistake of believing us. So when he took it, it created this tremendous emotional fervor in the United States to do something about it, and we went in against who had been our ally, the secular Saddam Hussein, who actually had a country in which the people there were safer then than they are now. Certainly the Christians that have been decimated in Iraq by the Muslim fundamentalists were certainly safer under Saddam Hussein. In fact, many Christians in Syria today fled from Iraq, searching safety under Bashar Assad. If you can, isn't that quite an incident? Well, anyway,
Gelman,
so
we have Mr. Shanker on the line finally.
Yeah, you got to hang on. I got to finish. So anyway, the United States created an environment. We purposely lowered our guard intentionally. We did it intentionally. So we said, go ahead and hit us. And so we created an environment. We knew Al Qaeda was going to attack us because Osama bin Laden told us he was, because we had breached. The infidels had breached the sanctity of the holy shrines of Islam in Medina and Mecca and Saudi Arabia. We had breached that, and we said, go ahead and attack us, and we lowered our guard purposely to allow them to do that, creating the emotional environment that the American people would want to go to war against those in the Middle East, but for interests of the United States government, not of the American people, and we're doing the same with Iran today, and I guess we can continue this later. So, all right, go ahead.
I want to pick this up when we're done with Mr. Shanker, but let's bring on the line now Jason Shanker, who is the President-Chief Economist of Prestige Economics based in Austin. And you have been ranked, Mr. Shanker, as one of the most accurate forecasters of crude oil prices in the world, and you are frequently called upon to present to central banks, governmental bodies, and industry groups. So, we've been talking a lot about in this hour just about the world and the state of the world, and things have gotten a lot more interconnected since World War I and World War II. So I heard you on a clip, I think it was on KView in Austin last week, about the economy and about the creation of new jobs. Where is the economy going? Are we going in the tank? Or is it turning the other way around? Or what say you?
It's probably somewhere in between that. We actually are seeing a slow improvement in jobs, a slow improvement in GDP growth in the U.S. and globally. Growth is probably going to move relatively sideways. High commodity prices are weighing on things abroad, and in the U.S. we're still digging ourselves out of the Great Recession.
Well, I have this, and I was talking with Dr. Gelman before about this. We talk about gas prices, and where I am today, they're approaching almost $4 a gallon. Why aren't we, and would it be your advice to whoever the next administration is, to start really exploiting our oil resources and start to begin to take back some of our own oil exports and begin to be much more dependent on what we can produce here. And why aren't we doing that? And are you advocating for that position? We should be, as some people say, drill baby drill.
Well, there's a couple things I'd say about this. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter where the oil comes from. It's a consumption issue. If we drill more in the U.S., it will create more U.S. jobs. It will add to our GDP, and it will have other sort of positive effects. Part of the reason we're not drilling is there are other, what economists refer to as externalities, environmental concerns that have sort of restricted some of the drilling in the U.S.
Well, we also, with all due respect, we have a president that's dragging his feet on the pipeline.
Well, now the pipeline is very different than new drilling. The Keystone Pipeline, postponing that, some of my clients would say that it's really the most shameful thing of the administration that they're trying not to do this because it does increase a surety of supply, and it will better integrate U.S. oil infrastructure with the rest of the world. That's different than creating new oil out of the ground. And so one is sort of integration into the global market, which is positive for flows and for pricing and transparency and for access, and that's great. Drilling more gets you more supply. But at the end of the day, our real problem is a consumption problem, and that our per capita consumption of crude oil is roughly double that of Germany or France, and it's almost 9 times that of China. So, our per capita consumption is where the problem is. It's not that we need more oil. It's probably that we should be trying to use less of it or use what we do use in a more efficient manner.
Dr. Gelman.
Well, I don't know how you can count China. I mean, China is essentially a third world country. The fact that they don't use oil, really, I'm sure they don't use much oil in Nigeria or Cuba. The reason the United States, there's a couple things. One, the reason the United States uses more oil is because we're the most productive country in the world, even now. And so productivity requires energy. So I don't see any problem that we use more energy per capita than any other nation. I think that's perfectly fine. In fact, I wish it was even greater, and it would be greater if the economy was where it would be without government restriction. That energy could be used more efficiently, I don't think there's any question about that. I look at the automobiles being driven around, and you have these 5,000-pound vehicles being driven around by little old ladies that are getting 8 or 10 miles to the gallon, when and it more for ego than for necessity. So I mean, there's no question that there are efficiencies which could be applied. I don't think the government's doing a very good job of educating on that issue, but I do think I'm not concerned that we use more energy per capita. I think that's perfectly fine. Is there more efficient ways of doing it? I certainly agree with that.
So, Jason, when we look at today at a snapshot of the world economy, and we are more interconnected than we ever have been before, what do you see as someone who gets paid very, very well to analyze this? Where do you see the economy going in the next year or a few years? And where do you see things like the economic indicators like crude oil or gold or precious metals? Where do you see that all fitting in?
Okay, that's good. So before we get to that, let me retort to something that was just said about per capita income not being a concern, because I was really trying to hold back laughter. The truth is that Germany consumes half per capita of the U.S. of how much oil we consume, and there's no way you can say that we are doubly productive for the amount of oil that we consume. What I would say is that, and for China, the real situation isn't that it's a third world country, because God knows they are the second largest exporter in the world, Germany being the first. And if we're looking at oil consumption as a gauge of productivity for things you produce, not just services, but physical goods, these countries are way more efficient than we are. And China, although it is a third world country, what you would say is that all the industry and the oil consumption is coming from coastal areas that are highly urbanized. And there is no way you could say lump in France and Germany into that mix. What really is driving it is the fact that we have a large country, and that under the Eisenhower administration, his experience of the Second World War, and that if an Autobahn had run from Berlin to Calais, that we may not have successfully conquered Europe. The decision to institute an interstate highway defense system in the U.S., which is a big country, instead of more rail, which is ultimately one of the main ways we won the war. That is really what's behind why we consume so much oil. And of course, the big automakers were more than happy to back the move for an interstate highway defense system, which answers the question, why is there an interstate in Hawaii? Right? It's not because it goes between states. It's because it's meant for tanks to go to the coast to hold back a Russian horde. right? That's what this is all about. It's about choices that were made back in the 50s for the U.S. as an economy, and we've never gone back and reviewed what we need in terms of infrastructure. It has nothing to do with how little or how much oil is going to be consumed for our productivity, because we could be a lot more productive as an economy. We could be a lot healthier as an economy if we consumed a lot less oil. And I'll tell you this, for every penny increase in a gallon of gasoline and diesel, the U.S. economy loses about $2 billion. So if you don't think that this hurts our productivity, you are sadly mistaken. And these are things that I think are absolutely critical. To brush it off and say that China's a third world country and that's why they don't consume much oil. Look, if they just double their oil consumption, right, we consume 9 times what they consume. If they double their consumption, which would put them just at the level of Brazil, okay, we still consume 4.5 times more oil per person than Brazil. If they just go up to the level of Brazil, you add another 9 million barrels per day of consumption to the global marketplace. This is a really, really big deal. And I cannot emphasize enough, although these sound like small numbers, when you roll it up to a population that big, it's a very big deal. And for the U.S., because we consume so much, this is going to hurt our economy in the longer run if we're not careful and we don't move to higher levels of efficiency. And you're right, we do need to drill more in order to meet those future expectations. But, you know, in the long run, our entire society is going to change. You're going to see a lot more people telecommuting in the long run, and you're going to see a lot broader changes because people won't really be able to afford to drive as much as they do. You're already beginning to see decreases in demand for gasoline, even now. If we want to talk about forecasts, we can do that now, but I wasn't going to leave this conversation.
That's fine. Do you have a comment, Dr. Gelman? Okay, I think I'm not sure where Dr. Gelman is, but let's get into that for a second.
Sure.
The 2 minutes we have left, let's talk about forecasting. Where
Sure.
With all of this going on in the global economy, and we have more and more countries thirsty for petroleum products, and we have an economy that's all interconnected. Where do you see this going? I mean, and it's great talking about those numbers, but for the average, Joe Sixpack who puts gas in his car and it's now it's over $4 a gallon, that's what he or she cares about.
Well,
so where are we going?
Yeah, Joe Sixpack needs to know that it ain't going to get cheaper, right? Because this is a demographics issue. Unlike real estate or even to a certain extent gold or any kind of stocks, no one has to buy that stuff from you. This is the problem with the real estate market. No one has to buy your house. They have to live somewhere, so rent prices go up. But they don't have to buy your house. Problem is, they have to buy oil. They have to buy nickel. They have to buy copper. They have to buy aluminum. This is stuff that gets consumed. And on the energy side, unlike on the metal side, there is no recovery. Once it's gone, it's absolutely gone. And as long as the world population keeps going up, and countries are becoming wealthier, per capita consumption is going up. You're looking at increased competition for limited resources. I mean, this is basic supply and demand stuff. Unless supply, sees a huge parabolic level of increase, which it's not likely to, you're going to see demand be a dominant force here and drive those prices higher and higher over time. And what Joe Sixpack needs to realize is these sorts of commodities are not going to be a lot cheaper in the future. They're going to be a lot more expensive.
I don't know if you're going to answer this question or not, but I got to ask you, what's going to be better for the economy going forward, a Republican or a Democrat in the White House?
I don't take a political stance. I don't think it matters. My personal opinion is it's better for the country if we have a split legislative and a split executive. That's my opinion. I think that's best for the country.
Okay, well, Jason, I certainly appreciate you being on the air. And if anyone wants to hear a little more about what Jason does, you can go to prestigeeconomics.com. Jason, thank you for being on the air. You are certainly a wealth of information, and see why you garner the appreciation of a lot of different companies who use your
Thank
services. We'll continue right after this break with more on the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone.
You are listening to the Talkback Radio Network. We hope you're being enriched by our program today. You may be listening via our archives or to our live broadcast. Dr. Gelman and Rabbi Rosenberg broadcast live on Thursdays from 11 a.m. to 12 noon Eastern, 10 to 11 a.m. Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. You may call the show live during those times, toll free at 888-930-1787, 888-930-1787, or you can find us in the archives 24/7 at ironmicrophone.com.
Welcome to Move Time Radio, presented by the Arthritis Foundation, and we're smack dab in the middle of our dance-a-thon to fight arthritis pain. Me, I've been grooving for 10 hours straight, baby, but I'm a boogie machine. See, movement is just one of the ways to help fight osteoarthritis pain. Another is weight loss. You get rid of just 1 pound. That's 4 pounds of pressure off each knee. For more information on managing pain, visit fightarthritispain.org. Then meet me on the dance floor. This message brought to you by the Arthritis Foundation and the Ad Council.
Dr. Lawrence Gelman is a South Texas-based physician and hospital administrator. His mission is to empower Americans with knowledge that will help change the direction of our country. Dr. Gelman has produced a series of DVDs with the facts on myriad political, social, and economic issues. At this time, he is so passionate about our country and the state of our government that he's declared a moratorium on any costs associated with his DVDs. He'll even pay the postage. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the store link. Choose from many outstanding DVDs, including The Hoax, Global Warming, A Convenient Lie, Holocaust, Pro-Choice, The Myth of Roe vs. Wade, and more. Visit ironmicrophone.com. Arm yourself with information that will change minds as well as the future of our country. Order the DVDs now while they're free. Do it quickly because this offer is subject to change in 90 days. Visit ironmicrophone.com and click on the Store tab to order your free DVD today.
You're listening to the Talkback Radio Network, home of the Iron Microphone. Our telephone lines are open at 888-930-1787. That's 888-930-1787. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Lawrence Gelman and Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg.
Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman with you. Dr. Gelman is back on the line with us. And our number is 1-888-930-1787, 1-888-930-1787 if you want to get into the conversation about what we're talking about, whether it's the economy or what Dr. Gelman's been talking about, just the history of how we got to where we are now. And it was really fascinating. It was fascinating to hear of our guests as well.
Let me just, we were attacked by the forces of government, but we were able to fend them off, so we're back on the air. And I can understand why they don't want to hear us. The previous caller was starting to make some disparaging remarks about me, and I was about to smash him down. I really don't have much time for that right now, but let me just say one of his facts, which is the so-called facts of some of these people, which is nonsensical. Sure. The United States has 3 times the gross domestic product of China, and we have 1/4 the population. By extrapolating that out, the United States per capita each person ought to be 12 times more energy consumption, and we're only 9 times more. And so on a productivity per energy consumption basis, I don't know where you get your numbers, but simple mathematics indicates that the United States per capita expenditure of energy is actually more efficient than in China, which is a third world country and will always be a third world country. My biggest concern is that government energy policy wants to turn us into a third world country as well.
Where did all of a sudden China get elevated by some of these people to a first world country? Where did that come from?
That came from the statists in this country that love China because it is a fascist dictatorship even bigger than ours, and there's nothing more that our media loves more than fascist dictatorships, because the media tends to is part of the fascist dictatorship regime. And so it is complete nonsense. Now, I've been to Germany. They don't have air conditioning. Oh, they say they have air conditioning, but if you go to Germany, 4-star hotels, which I had the misfortune of going to a couple have no air conditioning. The air conditioning in their restaurants, in theaters, in their homes are barely functional. And of course, much of their energy comes from nuclear power as well. So, I mean, energy is as energy does. The United States consumes a lot of energy. It consumes more than it ought to for its productivity. But there's no other country in the world that uses its energy as productively as we do. Now, that doesn't mean that we're particularly efficient. It just means that we're more efficient than any other country, and I'll hold to that. I think anyone that has lived in Europe or traveled to Europe or Mexico or any other of these nations, even the ones that are considered first world, such as France and Germany and England, you cannot compare their energy and the benefits their people derive from energy compared to ours. There's no comparison whatsoever. We have a lot more, we use a lot more, but we benefit a lot more than they do. They are an enslaved population entirely. We are only partially enslaved, but we will become more enslaved as time goes by.
So let's talk a little bit about how, we talked about how we got into World War II and Pearl Harbor. And then after World War II, take Japan and I know you've talked about this before, about how we really created the Soviet Union and how we took Japan and turned it into this, an economic empire. In many instances.
Japan was in pretty good shape before we blew it out of the water. We really didn't do much before the war for Japan. The Soviet Union, we created the Soviet Union, the United States did, the same way we created China. Without the United States, China would not exist today. In fact, China all the United States has to do two things to eliminate China, but we won't do it because of special interests. And what are those two things? All we have to do is default on the bonds and to stop buying Chinese goods. If we did that, China would collapse tomorrow. Without the United States supporting China in one way or another, they would collapse tomorrow. But because of Henry Kissinger and George Bush and other fascists that love statist government, the United States creates our own enemies. And why? Because it is in the interest of the government to have enemies in order to give a justification to enslave the American people. I want to move on to something. Now, let's talk about employment. Let's talk about that. We're running out of time. Now, what are people led to believe? That the situation is improving a little bit, that we're digging ourselves out of the hole. What a bunch of nonsense. Let's look at the real numbers, okay, in the United States. If we look between 2001 and 2008, now George Bush was no great shakes, of course, but if we look at that, there were 20 million more Americans in the United States from 2001 to 2008. Then there was an increase in the in the labor force from 143 million to 154 million. So that was an increase of about 11 million. So in those 8 years, we increased per year, the labor force increased by about 1.5 million, the labor force itself. The actual number of people that were actually employed went from 134 to 146 million. And so a very significant increase. Now, and the number of unemployed in 2008 was about 8 million. Now, let's take a look at what Barack Obama has done. Interestingly, even though we've added another 7.5 million more people to the population, the labor force has actually gone down. In the last 3 years, the labor force has gone from 153,617,000 to 153,124,000, whereas with George Bush, the labor force, potential labor force, increased by 1.5 million a year. Since Barack Obama has been president, it has actually gone down by 500,000. In the first 3 years of the Bush presidency, 4.5 million more people were added to the labor force. In the 3 years of Barack Obama presidency, it's gone down by 500,000. However, now this is all statistics, and this comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government agency. Now, even though the potential labor force went down by 500,000, the unemployment went up by 4 million. 4 million, and so when you're calculating out your percentage of your unemployment, your employment rate, which has gone from 9.6 to 8.3, somewhat an improvement, what a bunch of garbage. We actually have 4 million more unemployed than in 2008. At the same time, we have 500,000 less in the workforce. How do we have less in the workforce? Because if you're a college student and never had a job, you're not counted as potentially employed because you've never had a job. And so even though the population has increased by 8 million, the amount in the potential workforce has decreased by 500,000, and the number of unemployed has gone up by 4 million. Now, without the stimulus program, it is true, and through my calculations, what I have calculated is that probably the stimulus program has created about 3 million jobs, because my calculations show that without the stimulus, we would have officially 15 million unemployed. Now, actually, we have 19 million unemployed, but about 7 million of those have never had a job or are out of the job market. And so the reason that, and so therefore they are not counted. But the stimulus program spent $3 trillion for those 3 million. You know what that means? We spent $1 million. We spent $1 million for every person that Barack Obama employed. Think about that for a second. $1 million was spent of American taxpayer dollars to gain one employed person. We spent $1 million. Does that sound very efficient to you, since we're talking about efficiencies?
Not at all. And I'd like to have my $1 million, please.
Now remember, this is Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is not a conservative or libertarian think tank. If you go to the web, BLS.com, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have all these numbers. All these numbers are there, but you have to know what you're looking at. Now, what the government does is it lies to us because it confuses the issue by changing definitions. To me, someone who's not working who wants a job is unemployed. For the government, someone who's not working and never had a job is not unemployed. It doesn't even exist. That person, as far as the government is concerned, does not even exist. And I want to reiterate what I said before because it's extremely important. That whereas the potential workforce went from 143 to 154 million from 2001 and 2008, we actually are today have 153 million Americans in the potential workforce. That is actually almost 1 million less. Almost 1 million less than when George Bush left office. 1 million less in the potential workforce, even though the population has gone up by almost 8 million people.
How does that happen if you do the math and you have 1 million less people?
I just explained it to you. What I explained to you is that those people are not being counted. Since your potential workforce is going down, then the number of potentially employed, according to them, goes down, so that if the total number employed that can be employed goes down, then you're looking at a smaller denominator. And so therefore, since your denominator is smaller, it lowers your percentages. So it's all statistical mumbo-jumbo. But if you look at the actual numbers, it's really important. The true unemployment rate today, the true unemployment rate is well over 20%. But even according to the way the government does it, if they were legitimate, would be around 13% and not 8.6%. There are 5 million people today less people working today than in 2007. There are 5 million Americans less working today than in 2007.
Can you imagine what would happen if the unemployment rate was accurately reported in this election year, where Obama's numbers would be? If the actual number, as you're going through the math for us, was reported and not this fuzzy math that we're getting.
Well, he wouldn't get reelected. I mean, that's the obvious answer to that. If the American people knew, then he would be unelectable. The thing is, what they try to make it appear is that the person that's unemployed, it's kind of his fault. You see, because even at today's levels, 80% of the Americans who want to be employed are employed. So that's the vast majority. So you and I, if we listen to the media, we say, well, things are not so bad because, and then the person who's unemployed figures, well, the country's doing better. It's my fault. I'm unemployed. I'm having a tough time. But if people really understood what was going on, and the unemployed figured, wait a minute, it's not just me. It's not my fault. It's the government's fault. If I'm not one of just 12 million. I'm one of 20 million. If the employed knew what was going on, then the entire perception would change and Barack Obama would be thrown out of office. Not to say that the Republicans would do a much better job, but the reason that we're told these lies is obvious. It's all politically motivated. But all these numbers are there for anyone who wishes to examine them. It's just amazing to me how the media, which has access to this information and has more people to look it up than I do, obviously it's just you and me, if they actually were, if the media, the media is on 24 hours a day. Fox News, CNN is on 24 hours a day. You think they would, and you never will hear any of this. And that is, why is that? Because they're all part of the grand, true conspiracy, which is to make us believe that we need government. Well, we don't need government. Government is the great evil in the world, and the only reason our government even needs to exist is to protect us from the governments of other countries.
Well, we're going to try to put some of this information on our website and where they can go to get that information so they can see numbers that you're talking about. And you can go to ironmicrophone.com. We've got a minute to go here, and as we're wrapping up, it's fascinating because every week, Dr. Gelman, besides educating our audience, you educate me so much. I mean, I learn an incredible amount every week.
When George Bush left office, the average price of gasoline was $1.61 a gallon. In the United States today, it's nearly $4 a gallon. I really don't believe our consumption has gone up 200+%. I think there's a lot more going on here than just that.
Absolutely. With that, we're going to close the show for this week. We'll see you next time, next Thursday, 11 o'clock Eastern Time, right here on the Talkback Radio Network. Rabbi Stephen Rosenberg and Dr. Lawrence Gelman. We'll see you soon. Until then, thank you.